It all kicked off on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. I was helping my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, lug some hefty planters to her backyard, a simple act of kindness, in a sleepy neighborhood where favors were scarce and gossip was gold. I'd just set down the last pot when the squeal of tires on asphalt snapped my head toward the street. There she was. Linda, the self-crowned queen of the HOA, storming down the sidewalk like she was leading a parade nobody signed up for, arms swinging, sunglasses glinting, clipboard gripped like a battle axe. "You there?" she barked, jabbing a finger at me like I'd just keyed her car. "You're in violation of HOA Code Section 3.2.1, no unauthorized landscaping after 3 p.m. I blinked, thrown off, and glanced at Mrs. Grayson, who looked equally baffled. "I'm just helping her move some pots," I said, keeping my tone even as I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Not building a deck." But Linda wasn't hearing it. She was already in full HOA warrior mode, eyes narrowed, jaw locked, lips twisting into a smug smirk that screamed she was about to ruin someone's day. "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "You're disturbing the peace, breaking landscaping hour rules, and possibly trespassing. I could report you right now." I let out a small laugh, but that only lit her fuse. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, stepping closer. "People like you waltz into this community thinking you can ignore the rules. Not on my watch." My smile faded, not from fear, but from the effort it took to hold back. I could feel the familiar heat of adrenaline creeping up my spine, the part of me trained to stay cool under pressure kicking in. I glanced around. Neighbors were peeking through blinds, one even filming from behind a porch column. "Linda," I said quietly, "maybe we can sort this out like adults." That just threw gas on her fire. "Don't you dare lecture me," she spat. "I know the law. I've chaired this HA for 6 years and sat through every city compliance seminar they offer. I could recite every rule by heart if I had to. You're in the wrong, and if you don't leave this property now, I'm calling the police." I opened my mouth to reply, but she cut me off. "No, you know what? I'm doing it. This is harassment. I'll make sure they fine you, maybe even get you kicked out. We don't tolerate lawbreakers here." She yanked out her phone and started narrating my crimes to 911 like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. I stood there, silent, letting her tirade hit full throttle. Deep down, I knew something she didn't. I wasn't the one breaking any laws. When she finally paused, demanding to know what authority I thought I had, I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my leather ID wallet, flipped it open, and said 6 words that stopped her cold. "Ma'am, I am the law." For a split second, everything froze. Linda's mouth hung open mid-sentence, her phone still pressed to her ear, fingers locked like she'd been zapped. Then, in a rare, glorious moment of HOA history, she was speechless. The sunlight hit my badge just right as I held it up. "Detective First Class, State Criminal Investigations, DVY Shaun." As the realization sank in, all that smugness drained from her face like water from a busted pipe. "You a cop?" she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of her own misjudgment. I nodded, calm and steady. "No need to shout me." Silence hit harder than any words could. "You've been leave-wying here, pretending to be one of us," she muttered, and that's when I saw how deep her delusion ran. She didn't just enforce rules, she thought she owned the people who followed them. "I wasn't pretending," I replied, keeping my tone level. "I'm your neighbor. Until 5 minutes ago, I was just helping Mrs. Grayson move some flower pots. You escalated this." But Linda couldn't let it go, couldn't stomach the embarrassment soaking into her pristine blazer. "Well, that doesn't mean you're above the law," she snapped, her voice climbing to mask her crumbling footing. "Badge or not, you violate HOA policies. I'm within my rights to file a complaint and request a disciplinary review, especially if you didn't disclose your job on your residency form." The absurdity almost made me laugh, but I noticed the board members watching from across the street and the growing crowd of neighbors spilling onto porches, drawn by the drama. So instead, I took a step forward and said evenly, "Linda, you've accused me of breaking laws you don't understand, called 911 under false pretenses, and tried to intimidate a state officer while I was doing a neighborly favor. If I wanted to, I could write you up for obstruction and misuse of emergency services. But I won't, because unlike you, I know discretion." Her face flushed a furious red, fingers still clutching her phone like it was her last lifeline. "This is a violation of trust," she blurted as darting for support that wasn't coming. "People like you think a badge makes you untouchable. I don't care who you are, I'll file with internal affairs." The irony was staggering. Internal affairs? She didn't know a zoning rule from a parking ticket, and now she wanted to tangle with state oversight. Be my guest, I said, arms folding casually. I've been audited more times than you've rewritten trash pickup rules. Just make sure you tell them why you called the cop because I helped a neighbor on her own property while you misread a rule about garden pots. The crowd snickered. She heard it, and it hit her harder than anything I'd said. Her head whipped around, seeing neighbors watching, not cheering her on, but smirking, whispering, realizing the queen of the cul-de-sac might have finally overreached. Her lips twitched, groping for another threat, another bylaw to hurl, but all she managed was a choked, "This isn't over," before spinning on her heel and storming off, flustered, trembling, defeated but not done. Linda wasn't the type to quit. She was the type to regroup. As she vanished into her house, probably already drafting emails and flipping through HOA manuals like war plans, I knew she'd be back louder, bolder, and more dangerous. But next time, she'd know who she was up against. I'd moved here 2 years ago, fresh off a stint with organized crime where my name landed on the wrong list and a bullet missed me by an inch. The department suggested a break somewhere low-key, quiet, healing. I picked this cookie-cutter suburb with its pastel houses and lawn care rivalries, thinking it'd be the perfect spot to vanish. And it was for a while. I kept my head down, listed my job as consultant on the forms, and tried not to laugh at Linda's monthly newsletters about the EVYLS of unauthorized lawn gnomes. No one suspected a thing, and I liked it that way. The badge, the job, the life I'd live at, it carried weight, and sometimes it was easier to pretend it didn't exist than to explain it. But hiding doesn't erase who you are. The old instincts crept back, like when I noticed a strange van parked down the block for 3 days straight, or when a kid started coming home with bruised knuckles and skipping school. I stayed quiet, stayed out of it, but I was always watching. That's the part you can't switch off. Still, I never expected my first clash in this so-called peaceful haven to be with Linda, the HOA dictator with a designer clipboard and a persecution complex. She didn't just enforce rules, she turned them into weapons, targeting the quiet ones, the single parents, the elderly. I'd seen her fine a war widow for a second flag on Memorial Day, threaten a disabled vet for parking his van 2 inches over the curb. I bit my tongue, promising myself I'd only step in if it turned criminal. But that Tuesday she came for me. Barking laws she didn't grasp and threatening to report a crime that didn't exist. And in that moment, with half the neighborhood watching and my badge finally out, something clicked, not anger, not pride, but clarity. This wasn't just about Linda. It was about control masquerading as order, about people who think authority is something you lord over others, not wield for them. She saw a guy helping a neighbor and called him a threat. I saw a woman so obsessed with power she couldn't spot real responsibility standing 3 feet away. I hadn't come here just to rest, I'd come hoping for a world with quiet corners where I wasn't needed. Maybe that was a pipe dream. Maybe the world doesn't need less accountability, it needs more of the right kind. And if Linda was going to keep swinging her clipboard like a sword, maybe it was time someone raised a shield. 2 days later, I figured she'd slunk back to her lair to lick her wounds. Wishful thinking. Instead, she returned with backup Tuicha board members, clipboards in hand like sacred scrolls, marching down the street like a small-town inquisition. I was mowing the lawn, earbuds in, pretending not to notice the storm brewing, when her voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. There he is, flaunting the rules again. I killed the mower and turned to face the trio. Linda was in full performance mode, gesturing wildly, spinning a tale about me being a menace to community harmony and an unregistered threat to HOA standards. Then she dropped the bomb. We've reviewed your residency file. No current employment status, no record of neighborhood SER-VYC, no proof of community integration suggesting potential misrepresentation. One board member, Tom, a guy who once fined a family for painting their porch the wrong beige, nodded like a puppet. The other, Sarah, looked uneasy but stayed mute. Linda stepped closer, voice rising. Therefore, we're issuing a formal warning and suspending your voting rights in neighborhood privileges pending investigation. I stared, stunned not by the move itself, absurd as it was, but by her sheer gall, playing judge and jury in her suburban fantasy. You're suspending my what? I started, but she cut in. Your rights, she confirmed, shoulders squared. Until we verify you haven't falsified documents or posed as something you're not. That lit the fuse. I pulled out my badge again, slow and deliberate, and held it up. Detective First Class, State Criminal Investigations DVY Shaun, I said, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. Linda froze, her mouth flapping like a broken gate. Tom paled, Sarah's eyes widened. You want to talk falsified documents? I went on, voice steady but firm. I've passed every state clearance check you can name. You want to talk community safety? I've spent 12 years busting trafficking rings and locking up violent offenders. And you're here trying to strip my voting rights because I didn't list my job on a voluntary form. Linda stumbled back, ghost white, clutching her clipboard like a shield. You never disclosed, she sputtered, but I cut her off. I wasn't required to. I came here for peace, not politics. You made that impossible. The crowd murmured, someone clapped. Steve from down the block gave me a slow nod. Linda turned to her board members for rescue, but they were already bailing, Tom muttering about legal exposure, Sarah whispering a faint sorry as she retreated. Left alone, Linda trembled, eyes darting for an exit that wasn't there. This isn't your courtroom, I said quietly, just to her. And I'm not your defendant. Next time, think twice before lecturing someone on the law, especially when you don't know who you're talking to. With that, I walked back to my driveway. She'd lost the moment she saw the badge. The fallout hit fast. Within a day, my doorstep was buried under emails, printed notices, and HOA memos trying to backpedal the suspension like red ink could erase her public humiliation. But Linda doubled down. The next morning, I caught her pacing the sidewalk outside my house, phone to her ear, muttering about chain of command and conflict of interest. Her face set in grim determination. I didn't bite, I let silence choke her. That evening at the monthly HOA meeting, I showed up not because I had to, but because it was time to end this for good. The room was packed, buzzing with neighbors who'd never cared about these meetings until Linda's empire started to crack. She stood at the front, behind a folding table, armed with documents and that same smug look, like she could still talk her way out. Before we begin, she said, clearing her throat with fake poise, I'd like to address the recent confusion regarding resident Mr. Carter's occupation and our board's response. She launched into a twisted tale of oversight and miscommunication, dodging the word apology. Linda didn't apologize. Then she opened the floor for comments. I stepped forward before anyone else could. Let's be real, I said calmly. This wasn't about my job. It was about control. When it slipped away, you panicked. You turned rules into weapons to protect your ego, not this community. You used citations like bullets, meetings like courtrooms. When that failed, you went for public humiliation and false accusations. You said I was pretending to be one of you, but you're the one pretending, Linda. Pretending to care, to lead, to rule this neighborhood like it's your kingdom. The room went quiet. Linda's face hardened, her jaw clenched tight. I've lived in places where control meant life or death. I continued. I've worked cases where real danger isn't a late lawn trim, it's people abusing power because they think no one's watching. Well, I've been watching. Silence hung heavy. Linda opened her mouth, but Sarah, the quiet board member who'd once trailed her like a shadow, stood up. He's right, she said softly. All heads turned. We've let this go too far. I joined to help neighbors, not punish them. I'm done. She set her clipboard down and walked out, the door clicking shut like a final gavel. The illusion shattered. Others murmured agreement, some ashamed, some angry. Linda flailed, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, but the tide had turned. Her crown was gone, her army scattered. I didn't gloat, I just sat back and let the silence bury her. Days later, the neighborhood settled into a strange calm, bruised but cleaner, like after a storm. For the first time, I walked my dog without seeing Linda's shadow or finding citations under my wipers. The HOA board shifted, shedding fear for real community focus. Neighbors waved, chatted, even brought pies like it was the 50s. I thought Linda had vanished into her own HOA purgatory. Then came 3 firm knocks on my door. I opened it to find her, no clipboard, no blazer, just Linda, stiff and guarded, but with less fire in her eyes, more weight. May I come in? She asked. Instinct said slam the door, but I stepped aside. We sat on my porch, strangers still, and she stayed quiet for a long stretch. Then, softly, you embarrassed me. I didn't flinch. You left me no choice. She nodded, not agreeing, just understanding. I spent years thinking order kept people safe. Rules, structure, lines you don't cross, it made me feel powerful. Her voice cracked. But I crossed lines too, didn't I? I paused, then said, you didn't just cross them, you drew new ones to trap people. She swallowed hard, staring at the street. I thought being feared meant respect. Now even the board won't look at me. Silence fell, heavy but honest. You know what I hated most? She asked suddenly. That you made me feel small. I realized I never understood the law, just memorized rules. I looked at her then, really looked. The law's about balance, fairness, protection, I said. What you did wasn't law, it was control. She nodded, a tear slipping free before she swiped it away. I can't undo the damage, but I'm stepping down. Officially. I wanted you to hear it from me. That surprised men at the move, but the humility in her voice. She stood, pulling an envelope from her coat. This came from the city, she said, handing it over. A thank you letter for your service. I intercepted it out of spite. I took it, jaw tight. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For all of it. Before I could respond, she walked off, not with her old strut, but with slow steps, carrying her guilt. That night, I sat on the porch with the letter, watching the sun sink. The air was calm, the silence earned. I raised my glass toward her house and whispered, "Welcome back to the neighborhood, Linda."